So, if you want horror, I've got horror for you. I am going to interview Chris McAuley and Dacre Stoker, the creators of the creators behind and the curators of the Stokerverse. Dacre is the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. You may have heard of Bram Stoker. And Chris is an incredible creator, writer. They basically serve as producers of this whole Stokerverse project. Now, I'm going to show you their latest work. So, how cool was that? That was a really cool trailer. Can't wait to interview these guys. I've been reading this for quite a long time, actually. I'm about halfway through Dracula. I'm going to ask about that. But talking specifically about the Stokerverse novels, I have recently been working my way through The Virgin's Embrace and Dracula's Bedlam. Nice mixture of kind of history of Bram Stoker, history of the characters, but also the artwork, the comic styles, but also biographies, like I said, but then novelizations as well, like written stories, original texts. The forewords are really interesting. This one's really for you British people. There's a really interesting one that Joe Pasquale is involved in it as well in writing the. I didn't expect his name to pop up, but apparently he's really versed in Bram Stoker and really into him as well. So the next time you see me, I'll be talking to Chris McAuley, Dacre Stoker about the Stokerverse, into the Stokerverse. Okay, so I'm here with Chris McAuley, Dacre Stoker. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with me. Just to say, I'm really excited about chatting to you both about the Stokerverse. As a comic fan, I kind of heard about you through some of the trailers on YouTube, which I've already shown at the beginning of this show for the latest Dracula the Return, Cult of the White Worm issue 2. And I think I just want to start off by kind of asking you both, about this project, about this Stokerverse. Is there something, do you feel a great sense of responsibility in terms of the type of content you put out to make something new, but also honor the past?
Well, you've just hit the nail right in the head, Matt. Good observation. That's something that is near and dear to my heart. Is look, 127 years ago, Dracula novel came out. My great-granduncle Bram Stoker, wrote it. He certainly didn't quite get to experience the success that his novel and everything that his novel inspired. Long after he died in 1912. The novel became very popular once it hit the stage in 22 and in film in 31. And then, of course, it's gone crazy. But one thing that Chris McAuley and I have noticed, and one of our main sort of tasks, is to remind people where it all started. Because Bram's original Count Dracula has obviously been morphed in many ways. It's been reimagined in many ways. It's inspired many different iterations. And, as I said a few moments ago, 127 years later, we want people to realize what was the original Count Dracula, what was he all about? But not just that, what were some of Bram Stoker's things in his life that he was doing that inspired him? What were some of the things going on in the Victorian era? Other books that he read that was, just really ripe with all this really cool horror stuff. So we don't just limit ourselves to Bram's original Dracula. We look at the time that it was written, the things that were going on at that time, and that's the responsibility that we feel, we're beholden to, is open up the eyes of present readers to what was happening in his life at the time. And Chris, being a fellow Irishman to Bram, a fellow Freemason, he can tell you that he takes this responsibility very seriously. And I really enjoy working with a guy with the creative soul that he has, but also that sense of reverence to who my famous relative was and what he stood for.
For me, it's there's kind of a joint responsibility. There's a responsibility to our readers, and there's a responsibility to the memory of Bram and his work. So the responsibility to the readers is to make sure that we're bringing something dynamic, that's action-packed, that everybody enjoys to pick up and experience, and also the responsibility to Bram's legacy. That we are doing the original Dracula. We're not doing Universal's Dracula. We're not doing Sony Pictures Dracula. We're doing the original Dracula, which is very rarely seen. And I think that's a big responsibility, to make sure that everything that we write or we endorse, it has to come from that original source.
That's really interesting to make that distinction, because I recently did a screening of Nosferatu, and as I was doing my research and looking into the sort of ongoing legal issues and the sort of being pursued through a long period of time, how protective do you feel about that initial iteration, that very much making that distinction, Bram Stoker's Dracula? How do you have protective feelings over the property?
I mean, look, first of all, we know it's public domain now, right? So number one, because when you mention Nosferatu, the hairs to the back of my neck stand up a little bit. And just a minute on that, what's interesting is Bram was a theater manager. He did protect the dramatic rights by doing a stage reading. He had written a manual for the clerks of petty sessions all over Ireland, so he had a very legal side to him. But so did his wife, and she was able to convince the Independent Society of Authors to pursue, this copyright infringement, and she won. But in a way, I'm also glad that she did win, to set a legal precedent for that's the first novel to film infringement. But I'm also happy that the films did survive, because it's a heck of a movie, and it's also very close to Bram's Dracula. So had that actually been destroyed, like the German courts ordered, it would have been a big shame. But it did survive, and that's a wonderful reflection of filmmaking in 1922. Chris and I do discuss this a lot, that if somebody doesn't say, hold on a minute, guys, as much as we like to see Nicolas Cage playing Dracula in Renfield and Claes Bang playing Dracula in the BBC Netflix co-production, Gary Oldman and the others who modernize and reimagine, that's great. It's great for entertainment. But it also, there's an appetite, I know, for people that read the novel Dracula, who I've met at many conventions and film festivals and book festivals, say, when is somebody going to do something with Bram's original Dracula? And that's really what spurs Chris and I on in our RPG games and in the board games, audio dramas, video games, and also these graphic novels that we're hoping to get done the second issue, which is really integrating things in the world that Bram lived in, that he wrote in, and bringing them together with his Dracula character as only he envisioned it, and bring that back to the world, as I said, 127 years after it was created.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Bringing all those different mediums together. I mean, I think I know you touched on it earlier, but like in the Virgin's Embrace, like the foreword and the background and all of the information before we get to the graphic novel side of things, which is equally as exciting and interesting, but it really immersed me in that world. And I was trying to think of something similar that pieces things like that together. Sometimes you watch an old silent movie and it'll show like a page from a diary plus a letter and then something else, and it all pieces together this really full, rich picture. And that's what I get from, particularly from the Stokerverse novels, like the Virgin's Embrace, like I was talking about before. How did you guys, particularly you two, come together with this? Did you have all those ideas initially, or has it just built and built and built?
Now you got to ask Chris this, because he was the one that really created this union. It's a pretty fun story. So Chris, you got to tell Matt and the listeners how.
Yeah, it is strange. There was a friend of mine who was doing a comic book anthology, and she was doing like a horror-based comic book anthology. And she said, "Look, would you write a vampire story?" So I wrote this strip called Dracula, Lord of the Future. And essentially what happened was Dracula had been kidnapped by a Weyland-Yutani style company, 200 years in the future. So he gets chained up silver and all these it's a very sterile environment, and there's all these various doctors, and they're extracting cells quite painfully from his body. And he thinks back on all the various encounters he's had with humans, from medieval times to, Van Helsing, even in the Wild West, and then in World War II. And, one of the crucial points was he thinks to himself that throughout his life, he's always known incredible violence, but never such dignity. But then he stops philosophizing, and he just he gets out, he kills everybody, and then jumps in a spaceship and kind of goes off to God knows where, So I'd written the comic book. It took me an hour to write. And we got, I can't remember the name of the artist now, but he was a 2000 AD artist, and he was doing the artwork for it. So I sent it to Dacre, and I said, look, I'm very respectful of Bram's work. I studied at Trinity University, where Bram studied. I know an awful lot about his fictional work. And, if you don't want me to use Dracula, I'll come up with another vampire name. It doesn't really matter. But Dacre then called me up, I think, that morning after he had read the script.
Yeah.
And it was, wasn't it? It was. And then we started talking about looking at creating some of Bram Stoker's short stories in graphic novel form. So The Virgin's Embrace was the start of that. That became very popular, and then I decided that one night at midnight, I decided that I would write an audio drama, and that's where Voices of Dracula came from. And we were very lucky to have a star-studded cast with that, Doctor Who stars and Hollywood stars and all of that. And then we wrote Dracula's Bedlam, and then we just kept going. So I think around about Dracula's Bedlam, when I started working on that, we came up with the idea of calling it the Stokerverse. And then we had the vision for, pushing not just doing graphic novels and books and audios, but then pushing it into games, so tabletop games. And then we have a video game that's coming out next year as well. So we're kind of expanding out into different media territories, telling new stories, but within the classical sense of Bram's universe.
And that is the key, Matt. There was trust. At the beginning, I have to admit, when I see this Dracula in space, I was thinking, oh gosh, here we go again.
Leprechaun in space,
But Chris was very convincing, as you just heard. But he
sounds amazing.
He's being a Freemason, being an Irishman, being a Trinity grad. I felt that he really was genuine in his sense of reverence to the original source and to the original author. And so we just, back and forth. And every book we went through, when we adapted one of our favorite stories, both of us sort of confirmed it. We said, we really like what was originally called The Squaw. It's really a honeymoon story of Bram and Florence turned into The Virgin's Embrace, because, the name is just not right. You can't publish that nowadays. And he had a friend, Jessica Martin, who during COVID was out of work as an actress, but she was a very talented artist. And, she was the Doctor Who actress. Like, my gosh, we got her.
Ah.
And it was like, yeah. And Chris pulled in his resources, pulled in friends. And before he knew it, the trust was building. That first work was very in keeping. I'd show it to my wife, my relatives. They say, yeah, keep going. You're on the right track. So there was that sense of, we're not going to just jump off and capitalize without paying homage properly to Bram. So, and it's, it's a testimony to Chris's creativity, but also, his restraint and the way he does things the right way. And that's set the tone for everything we've done all the way up to this, issue number 2 of Dracula Return.
Yeah, that sounds like I was interviewing an animator recently, and she was saying about how working alongside other creatives closely and bouncing ideas, you just want to do more and more and more. You might initially not have that plan, but that plan evolves and changes through kind of the excitement of working alongside other people.
It does, and he had contacts in those worlds, but it all comes back to trust, to make sure that he's not going to, create something just because somebody throws a contract in front of you with some dollar signs, and just, okay, well, I guess this is where we deviate. No, we're staying true to it. But at the same time, you've got to be creative. You've got to update things, a little reimagining every now and then, inspired by things. And that's when we spend a lot of time on the phone together, bouncing these ideas off, which is a lot of fun, the brainstorming, and what comes out of there. It just blows me away at times.
I bet it is, but yeah, because it definitely comes out in the novels. There doesn't seem to be any limits. And speaking of that, you're both responsible. And I know when you emailed me, one of the first emails that I got from you, you said, Dacre, that you were responsible for different research and writing the stories. How does that work? How do you kind of divide up work? Obviously, is it a clear line, or is it just kind of following interests? How does that work?
Well, it starts with this. It starts with me being sort of the keeper of the family flame. Bram Stoker was one of seven. Of the seven kids in the family, there were only three that have offspring. Two have offspring alive today. So Bram's youngest brother is my great-grandfather. I did inherit some of his books and papers, but also he's got two great-grandsons alive today, and they have inherited a lot of things. They've donated some to museums. They've sold some to different collections, but they have told me where they all are. So I have spent the last 12 years as this sort of, people joke, this sort of Dracula version of Indiana Jones, digging around in different places, trying to find letters, notes, and things that Bram used for his research. So to date, my responsibility in this union with Chris, and I've also used it with other authors like J.D. Barker writing Dracula and Ian Holt, Dracula the Undead. I found the Dracula typescript. It's out in Seattle, Washington, that Paul Allen owns. That's the original manuscript, but typed, so it's a typescript with all the things that are crossed out. So things that are taken out of the typescript is fair game for me and Chris McAuley. Same thing with the Dracula notes in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. I've analyzed those to death. I know everything in that, and what was not included in the story, fair game for Chris and Dacre. And then also Bram's journal that I discovered in the Isle of Wight. That was published with Elizabeth Miller. So I know Bram's inner workings. I know how he was wired. It was a journal he kept for 7 years, and have all kinds of interesting things in it that, again, didn't make it into some of his writings. So those are things that I present to Chris. I say, hey, Chris, what about this idea? What can you do with this? So he then takes, like, here's a perfect example. Nothing in the novel Dracula explains how Jonathan Harker actually escaped from the castle. Right? Yeah. How did he actually end up in the convent in Budapest and Sister Agatha ministering to him? Mm-hmm. That's something that, I can't disclose all my secrets, but from his notes and from the typescript, I can see, this is what Bram was thinking. Some of the things may not be completely fleshed out, but that's where if I take that and I compare it to other things that are very similar in his notes in the typescript, then I can say this is reasonable assumption that something Bram would have done. This is in his wheelhouse. Chris, let's discuss how we can use it. And then his creative genius will take this and go with it. And then he might come back. Hey, Dacre, we're stumped here. What about this? I say, but Chris, there's a sulfur mine. I've actually been to this location in Transylvania. There's actually a sulfur mine there. How can we work this in? Oh, great. That's what I need, man. And then he'll go and come back with something.
And off we go. Wow. That sounds really like a kind of exciting way of working. So speaking about Dracula the Return, Cult of the White Worm issue 2, where does that sit within the Stokerverse? Is the sort of the White Worm element is one of my favorite parts, one of my favorite sort of you know, thinking to different versions and different things that I've read. So where does that fit within the up-to-date Stoker?
Well, let me start, and then Chris is going to take it, because it's, again, a perfect example of how we operate, right?
Okay.
The last story Bram ever wrote was The Lair of the White Worm. He wrote it when he was in Cruden Bay, Scotland, where I've been now 3 times. I actually know the house he was in. There's letters to his brother Tom about, you know, how his health was not good. I know he had a stroke by the time he was there on his final visit there in 1911, excuse me. He had lost the sight in one eye. I saw the letter that his son wrote to the first biographer, Harry Ludlam, that Bram was writing this just as a favor to his publisher to crank out another supernatural thriller. And so this came from real folklore. So when Chris and I were saying, okay, we know all this stuff associated with the end of Dracula, how can we convince people that Dracula could reanimate? What higher god is there? And boom, when McAuley got onto this white worm, it was like there was no stopping the guy, and he just took it. So Chris, I've queued you up well. Take it from here.
yeah. It comes from the Irish god Crom-Cruach, which is essentially where you get Samhain from the Halloween festival. So the Irish would have sacrificed humans to Crom-Cruach to make sure the harvest was successful and babies weren't stillborn. And this is the white worm. This is this is where Bram got it from. You know, so I started with that, and then I realized that if we integrated that in a Lovecraftian sense, that white worm was a larvae of greater gods that Dracula served. And that, I mean, that it's always interested me, you know, what gods would Dracula serve? You know, and we've kind of gone into that in the RPG a little bit, so I don't want to spoil it too much. But we have looked at sort of the theology behind Dracula. And theology is very, very important in Bram's work, very important in Dracula as well. So anyway, so yes, in issue 1, we grabbed the iconography of the white worm, and we use it in a particular way to resurrect Dracula, and he's not the same person after that. And you see more of that in issue 2. You actually see more of the benefits of this union between Dracula and the worm. If you continue to read Dracula's Bedlam, you'll see the worm in there. Actually, you'll see it in the graphic novel pages. So if you flick through it, you'll see how Renfield meets the white worm and how that changes Renfield as well.
I love the idea of that, because I think for a big section of people, maybe the Ken Russell film might be their only kind of interpretation, which you know is a very much a horror comedy and a very particular style. So I was really excited to see this because it differs so much. And you know, it's an exciting thing to do, is to see something that you're familiar with but interpreted in a different way. And I love all the religious iconography and things that you were discussing then. Sounds really fascinating. In terms of like coming to you with ideas, if somebody, you both are kind of aware of somebody else who has ideas, or somebody within, is it friendship based, or people you admire, or people reach out to you? I imagine a lot of people reach out with ideas because they are excited by reading the works that you've both produced together.
You got to be careful with things like that, because I mean, look, I go to a lot of conventions. Chris has a lot of contacts in the gaming world, in the RPG world, comic world. So it's difficult because somebody comes, oh man, I got a great idea, I got to tell you. I say, whoa, hold on. You know, if you tell me your idea, and let's say Chris and Dacre, we already have that idea somewhere, and we use it somewhere, someone's going to come looking for you and say, wait a sec, you owe me some money for that. So it's better that we actually hunt those other ideas down, because I mean, look, people want to jump on board something that's working. They love ideas. They love to share ideas, create it. And I love to hang around in a pub and have a pint and chat with about ideas. but it's dangerous in a way because they could come back to bite you a little bit later on. So quite often I say, okay, hold your idea. I'm really sorry. I'm not allowed to accept, an unsolicited, idea of what you think about, a future story. But listen, if we want to contact you, we'll contact you. But
I guess it's a balance, isn't it? Yeah,
it is a balance. But
people are excited, and but still
they do, and again, on a casual note, it's really cool to sit around and chat about that. But on a more formal note, and I'm sure if there's other authors listening, it happens a lot. Hey, would you read my manuscript? Would you read this? My gosh, if I was to be nice and read everything I was sent, I'd never get my own work done. But they think because you're a relative of the guy that wrote Dracula, or you're published, I got time to read everybody else's stuff. Unfortunately, we just don't. So it's really up to Chris and I to hunt down people. We keep our ears out there. And if we hear somebody's got something, like Chris, tell them how you got John Peel involved in Bedlam. I mean, it's like, this is incredible. So that's a good story.
Yeah, I also work in the Doctor Who worlds. And, when I grew up, John Peel was one of my favorite authors. When it came to the Doctor Who stuff. So that was actually, I was introduced to Doctor Who through books, because I grew up in the 90s. So I grew up in the wilderness years, and there was no Doctor Who TV. And I used to, as a small child, just to grab John's books in my little hands and head home with them and read all about the Daleks. So John and I had a friendship anyway, and he had been encouraging me as a writer. And we chatted about bringing him on board with Dracula's Bedlam, and he had a couple of ideas for some really interesting characters. So Dacre and I chatted over with him, and it blended perfectly with what Dacre and I were working on. Other ways that people do approach us is we've got artists who come and say, we want to be part of the comic books, we want to be part of the games. Here's our portfolio. Here's a Dracula we've illustrated. Would you like to have a look at that? Do you like the style? That's welcomed. That's welcomed. I always welcome that to look at arts or fan art. Fan art especially is always welcomed, and we always display that when we can. But when it comes to collaboration, we need to be very careful with IP. We are the sole IP holders of everything, which is really important. So we don't share IP or anything like that. If somebody comes to me with an idea of a script or anything, I usually say, keep it to yourself and try and shop it yourself. Don't show it to us, because it could become part of our IP if you want, any involvement in Stokerverse.
That's really interesting, because I was literally, my next question was going to be kind of how you work with artists, but to be honest, you've really explained that.
You mentioned artistically, like for instance, when you held up when we started DRACULA, how I met J.D. Barker was that I pursued him because I read one of his books, and I loved the way he portrayed a certain character. And in this case, it was the book Forsaken and a Nanny. And I had in my mind for about 2 years, Bram Stoker's nanny, actually the nanny of all the Stoker children, needs to be in this story that turned out to be Dracula, like 5 years later. But it was like I was fixated on a certain type of nanny that appears to be a wonderful person but has a real spooky side. And I had myself had 2 children, and the second one was when both my wife and I were working, so we needed to hire a nanny. And it really scared the bejesus out of me that what happens if this nanny is like in the book that J.D. Barker wrote, and it proves to be somebody not quite as caring as you think. So that's when I said, okay, I gotta find this guy out. We were both members of Horror Writers Association. I was actually giving and presenting the best first novel of the year, and JD was up for it. He didn't win it, but in a way, I found him. I seeked him out, and he said, "Well, JD, you didn't win the award, but I've got an idea. You want to work together on this?" And it turns out, a few years later, Dracula comes out, and we're the best-selling horror hardcover in the UK. So things have their way of working out. So there is something. Chris and I both read. We both look at things online, and we do notice things that have a particular feel to them that they may work for us in the Stokerverse. So we go and pursue them.
So is Dracula the one that is the closest you think to being made into a feature film, or is that something that you're not
Yeah,
as interested?
that's interesting. Paramount did purchase the option when the book came out. Um, it's a funny story that JD and I were both told by our agent to come up to New York, from obviously different places, and we were arrived at about within an hour each other at the airport. So we shared a cab into our hotel, and we were supposed to be meeting with the 5 different publishers that day who had agreed that they really liked Dracula and were going to wanted to bid to publish it. That's what our agent set up. So we had these meetings lined up with them, and on the car ride in, we get a phone call from our agent that 2 different studios were interested in optioning the film rights to it. So we're in the back of a cab in New York, and I don't know if you've ever done that, Matt, but it's like stop and go traffic. I'm already feeling fairly nauseous because I get motion sickness.
I do. Tell me about it. Yeah, I really do.
So
yeah.
I was not feeling on top of my game. Luckily, JD was, so he had the speakerphone on, and I'm feeling like, oh God, this is horrible. But we're talking to guys that are like complimenting you like crazy on the novel.
Yeah.
And for the one time in your life, until they have purchased the option, you're the king, right? And then once they bought it, it's like they're going to treat you, not as well until such time as they actually exercise the option. So long story short, Paramount is the one that we choose. We like what they have to say, but they extended it 3 times for 18 months. Each time.
I was going to say if there's a limit, yeah.
Well, there is. You're smart if you limit it to 18 months, and then it's up for renewal another 18 months, and they keep sending you a nice check every 18 months. But what happened in that 3 times 18 months is that leadership and decisions change at Paramount, and it turns out they're spending more money on Yellowstone and all those spinoffs with Kevin Costner and so on than they were thinking about Dracula. That our agent finally kind of played hardball with it and said, hey, okay, guys, if you're really not going to do this, just release it so the guys can get on with it. And they were nice. They said, look, you're right. Leadership have changed. Our direction has changed. We'll release this back to you. So now we actually have an option with Spin a Black Yarn, who is run by 2 guys, Ryan Lewis and Josh Mallerman, who's a good friend of ours who did Bird Box and Mallory. So they're out now shopping it around, but they're shopping it around as a series rather as a feature film. And
that would work. Yeah.
I think since you're reading it now, you'll probably get it. This is what happens to authors is feature
particularly
film.
now when you look at what Mike Flanagan's doing and things like that. That's where people are very excited. As much as I'm not the hugest Mike Flanagan, I'm probably a little bit too attached to Vincent Price and Roger Corman, and to kind of let myself go too much with it. But I see the benefits of doing it in that episodic way. You build a rich tapestry, which I think would fit really well with Dracula.
I think it would. It's got the ups and the downs and the cliffhangers and so on. So long story short, right now, I mean, earlier today, Chris and I were chatting with some folks, and we got to chat with some other folks later today about some of the other properties that we can't quite tell right now because of NDA.
Okay.
But that's the next move. I mean, listen, when Chris has got us into graphic novels, into RPGs, into board games and video games, the next logical progression is to take some of these properties with the creatures we have created and move into film in some capacity where our ears are wide open. And I think it'll be cool, because I think if we can do that, that's one area that Bram Stoker obviously had no control over in his days, although his widow did. She had the dramatic rights. Dean and Balderston, she went in with them on for the stage rights. They sold those dramatic rights to Universal, but they had no control, once Universal got a hold of it. And so I would really like to see Stoker and McAuley be able to, bring to the world some of that more authentic Bram Stoker's true horrifying Dracula, and I think the world is ready for it. I think their appetite is ready for that sort of thing.
Oh, there is for sure. There is for sure. And I think that just to kind of switch gears a little bit and bring it back to the comic and the kind of the creation of it, because of the different elements that come into it. I was just, and I will definitely come round to a question about the comic here, but it might not sound like that to start with, so you might need to bear with me. So as I was reading through about other people, historical figures like Buffalo Bill Cody, and people popping up into the stories, I was really interested in those kind of connections. You know, I know that there's a connection with Oscar Wilde, links with people like that. These real life people who had impact in Bram Stoker's life, other than the kind of biographical elements of the comics, how do you kind of serve people's interest in that? Because the more I read about those things, and I have read a few biographies, but I like it in these bite-size ways. You know, it's certainly more digestible and interesting. Just tell me a little bit about how you kind of link the stories to these real-life people as well.
Well, listen, the world was smaller in those days. The relationships of people, the intelligentsia, the writers of the world, the people in the theater world, interesting people that Bram was friends with: Arthur Conan Doyle, Mark Twain, Theodore Roosevelt, some of the artists of the day. So it adds some serious flavor and sense of reality for Chris and I to put these into the story. And also people that Conan Doyle created, you know, to have a Sherlock Holmes element. I mean, Bram was very good friends with Arthur Conan Doyle, was invited to his wedding. I've seen letters back and forth. One letter from Conan Doyle, wow, actually, you know, congratulating Bram on, this is the greatest novel of diablerie I've read in a long time. So it's little tidbits like that I will find and feed to my buddy Chris. And he goes, God, we gotta have something like that in there. That's you know, of the time. So by putting these real people in the novel, it's the same thing Bram Stoker did in Dracula. He used real people, merged people together, real places for his novel Dracula. So we're just following in those footsteps, Matt, and making it seem realistic and also interesting, because now we know a lot more about those people, right? Because they're, you know, over a century old, and we're keeping them alive by putting them in that circle that Bram moved in. Chris, why don't you tell them, you know, what sort of spurred you on when we said, yeah, let's go with that, because I love what you've done with number 2, having some of the universe spread a bit.
Yeah, so like with issue 2, we're really bringing the verse into the Stokerverse comics. So we do have a side story which reveals, you know, who Dracula was really based on, and it wasn't Vlad III at all. It was somebody who Bram Stoker knew intimately. And we have it's beautifully illustrated by David Hitchcock, who I think's he's a real gothic horror master when it comes to illustration. He's amazing. You know, very intricate designs. I have a tendency to put a lot of occult stuff into the artistry, because I love having readers look at the comic the first time round, get the story, look at it the second time round, start seeing all the hidden stuff in there. And all the hidden stuff in there has particular meaning to the Stokerverse and Bram Stoker's world. So there's nothing that I put in there that doesn't have a level of relevance. If you look at, for example, Dracula, the return issue 1, there's a cover that has Dracula's face in red and a triangle. And it really freaked out some of our friends at Whitby when there was a white triangle like that found in a derelict wall. And I've never been to Whitby, so there you go. Right. Oh. But yeah, so we've got the character who was really that Dracula was really based on. We also started bringing in characters like Sherlock Holmes. So we have a Stokerverse version of Sherlock Holmes. How we believe Sherlock Holmes would have been written if it had been written by Bram Stoker.
Right.
So for example, you know, the divergence, one of the divergences is that the case of the Sussex vampire actually really was a vampire, and Holmes did encounter a vampire. And you know, there's an old Basil Rathbone film called Scarlet Claw, and actually within it, Holmes does not discount the supernatural. So that's always a nice reference point there as well. We've got Frankenstein's creature in there as well, as if it had been written by Bram. We've got werewolves. We have Jekyll and Hyde. We've got a version of Jekyll and Hyde, Stokerverse as well, and a creature from the Black Lagoon.
One of my favorites.
Which came about actually with Dave Hitchcock illustrated it on the cover, and then our publisher Shane Chebsey said, "Yeah, go on. I know you want to write a creature from the Black Lagoon story as if it was a Bram Stoker tale, so go and write that as well." So this is all getting included for the people who back the Kickstarter version of the comic. Right. These are special items that will not be included if the comic goes to retail. We will not be including those, and that's why it's important. So I should say Zoop or Zoop campaign. I always get the two mixed up. Yeah, but it's our Zoop campaign. These are special features.
Right. Those things really feed into fans and people who have a deep love for horror. What I feel when I read all of the books that I've referenced in this interview is not underselling the intelligence and passion of the fans and the people who read them. And other horror YouTubers, like my friend of mine who knows a lot more about it than me, Al Lacard, on his channel, his stuff, he is a really well-schooled reviewer of horror. And I guess what I'm saying is you're not guilty of underselling the intelligence of your readers. Like, they have that same love and passion about all of those characters that you've just mentioned. So that must be exciting to serve those people. You must get great feedback.
Well, it is. It really is very satisfying, because again, you see comments they make on social media. I meet some of them at conventions, and they go, I really love this monster, and how you connected this to your universe is so cool. It's a nice homage to somebody. It means a lot to me. And now you've pulled these two worlds together, even though it's small in a minor way. It means a lot. And I think nowadays, because it's over 127 years old, that these little homages or Easter eggs, little nuggets, some people call them, that's what people look for. Is that little extra piece, that small, somewhat insignificant, but it means a lot to many people that do look for those things.
Oh, yeah. I've just got two more questions for you, and they're a little bit of my more off-the-wall kind of questions, in the sense of one of them, we talked a lot. We've talked quite a bit actually about that real-life people being involved in the story, whether it's in the biographical side or the novel side or in the comics side. One of the best books that I've read in the last couple of years is a book called "You Could Do Something Amazing with Your Life, You Are Raoul Moat" by Andrew Hankinson. And that is essentially telling someone's life from their perspective, but challenging you on the way that because you are totally immersed in this person's life, but you know that they've done some terrible things, but then you kind of have the wool, the carpet pulled out from underneath you as the story goes along, or getting near the end. I love that fact that these characters are in your stories, and I know we've just kind of touched on that, but in terms of people like real life people, have you had anybody in touch with you who is related to the people that have been included in the books, like kind of their equivalent of a Dacre Stoker?
No, yes, actually, Ellen Terry, who was the famous actress from the Lyceum Theater days, and Henry Irving. I mean, this was 27 years of Bram's life. Both of them have living relatives that I have chatted with. I've met them in person. The first point was in 2012, the 100th anniversary of Bram's death. We had a big celebration when I actually launched the Bram Stoker's Lost Journal with Dr. Elizabeth Miller at the Lyceum Theater, at the publisher's place. All these folks were invited, and I had been in touch with them by email, but never met them in person. And it was really cool to see, the version of Dacre Stoker by Ellen Craig's granddaughters, and same with Henry Irving's great grandson, who was like yeah, I appreciate what you're doing. You know, we've got a lot in common. Bela Lugosi's granddaughter, I've met. You know, she's doing this a similar thing, keeping the intellectual property alive, promoting and protecting her father's legacy. So those are some in particular, and you know, it pops up every now and then. Some creative person like yourself, Matt, will say, "I got to get these two guys on a podcast together," or "It would be so cool to have you on a stage together." You come from the same backgrounds. You know, you're keeping your famous relative stories alive, and then we share stories. You know, like, oh boy,
that must be really interesting to.
Do you get that question asked all the time? What was it like growing up as Bela Lugosi's granddaughter? And you know,
and I imagine the answer is they do.
Well, and did you meet him? I say, wait a sec. You know when he died, and you know how old I am. But you know, we do have memories, you know, that are connected from living relatives that have. So no, it is cool, and it also gives us yet another sense of reverence to this does matter. You know, living relatives of these famous people who made a big difference to many, many readers. And so the work that Stoker and McAuley do not only matters to us, but we get a sense of what it means to all those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of readers out there who are affected by what we do.
No, that's true. That's a really good point. And my last question to both of you is around the physicality of Bram Stoker as a person. I think what a lot of people might not realize is, you know, his kind of sporting background, the rugby captain, the rowing, and the physicality of what he did. And I know that something you share, Dacre, with him, your sporting background as well. Do you think that physicality? Because I'm somewhat of a writer, and I wouldn't say that sports goes hand in hand with my writing. I love sport, but not as an athlete. Do you think that Bram's kind of athletic background and interest in sport and physicality, do you think that kind of influenced the writing in a way that's quite noticeable to you as obviously a historian, or both of you as historians of and understanding his life? Does that physicality come into it?
I'll tell you where it creeps into it, at least in my opinion, then you can hear from my buddy Chris, is that his physicality caused him to develop self-confidence from developing as a 7-year invalid. And then in 10 years, he managed to emerge from being this child cooped up into his house, you know, developing his you know, sense of imagination, a dark sense of imagination. But he emerged from that by doing exercise. And then he goes to Trinity, as Chris did, and he immerses himself in the culture of the school, which is very mano a mano, both in the classroom, debating, philosophical society, historical society, and then on the sports field. So I think that helped him develop a self-confidence that then puts him out there, as in my case, having been an Olympic athlete and a coach, getting used to rejection. You know, both you don't always meet your goals. You know, you don't hit that time in the swimming pool, or in Bram's case, you know, rugby or rowing or cross country or long distance walking. You got the confidence to keep going. You know, you got a bad review, get back to it. Your publisher hands you something back. The editor hands you, get back to it. You know, that stick-with-itness that athletes have, and that confidence to say, by golly, I can just get better at it rather than just give it up. And I think that's probably where it helped Bram, as it's helped myself. Just give me that confidence to get back to the drawing board. If it doesn't go well, you have a better day tomorrow with hard work and determination. See what Chris
certainly.
has to say about that.
Personifies that resilience. Chris, are you aware of that kind of? Or I'm sure you are, but was that something that you were mindful of, that physicality?
Yeah, the humor, a lot of the humor, the artistry, his illustration and painting. You know, I tried to be an illustrator. I was a comic book colorist for a while, for a couple of years. You know, all of that kind of ties into how Bram actually writes and how he approaches things. You know, it's that sort of painterly style, as someone once said. And that's how I look at him. You know, I look at the you know, broad-shouldered guy who in the photos looked very stoic, but enjoyed life. He enjoyed a joke. He was very he was somebody who really stood by his friends. You know, he stood by Oscar Wilde. You know, he loved his wife a lot as well. There's a lot of lessons to be taken from how Bram lived life, and I always find that very touching that he loved his wife. I think they're both in the same plot together, aren't they, Dacre? They're both.
Well, their ashes, his
Their
ashes,
yeah.
are in an urn, and hers were sprinkled right next door in the rose garden.
Yeah.
For some reason, Chris, she didn't want to be confined by an urn, so it's
fair play. My wife wants to be a tree whenever she goes. She wants
rose
to be,
bush. Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. You know, I'm more traditional, but you know, those are the kind of things I think about a lot. When it comes to, you know, the writing style of Bram. And then Dacre has sent me a nice. If you go to the Bram Stoker Estate website, you can find a nice bobblehead. It's very accurate, and I have it sitting beside me when I write. So Bram's always kind of watching over the two of us, I think. But yeah, those are the things that are important.
You know, I implore people to get involved and kind of trace through the Stokerverse and read the comics, read the books, read the novels, get involved and really, you know, everything all the links will be in the description, and the trailer is at the beginning of the show. Is there just to kind of say thank you to both of you for your time, but also is there anything that you feel I've missed or anything you want to add before we finish related to the latest Dracula: The Return, Cult of the White Worm Volume 2? Let's get some people, let's get some more eyes on that, because it's just I'm really excited about really delving in. I have only just scratched the surface of the Stokerverse.
Well, here's the last message I want to say is, besides it's incredibly well written and well drawn, everything else, some of the logistics that Zoop is helping us with that we didn't get done in the first one is to have these things printed both in America and in the UK, so the printing charges are less. That's what our publisher has told us, and also for the shipping these things around, much more efficient. Of course, last time around with #1, there was a strike by the Royal Mail, which put a damper on things. And we want to assure people that we've got all these problems that we can anticipate right now have been well taken care of. So trust us, the product is going to be great. And the way these things will get to you once you pledge and back this stuff will be taken care of in a much more efficient manner than the first time around. So bear with us in the Stokerverse. We're growing. Jump on board now, because you better catch this train while it's still at the station.
Love
it. Chris, is anything you want to add to that? That sounds like a brilliant ending line.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's like please support our work in the Stokerverse. You know, it is authentic. We do care about what we're doing. It's not just another Dracula product. This is unique, carefully crafted, and yeah, it's something we're very passionate about and we care about. And the artists as well. I mean, I have to pay tribute to all the artists like Chris Geary and David Hitchcock and Matt Solf. You know, these guys give a damn about this product as well. And you'll know that. So if you pick up issue 1 and you have a look, or if you go onto our Zoop crowdfunding page, you'll see some examples of the artwork there.
Yeah, great stuff.
I've actually got some thanks to Shane at Scratch Comics. He sent over some of the artwork, and I'll be putting that in the video when I edit it all together. So you know, really want this to be a shop window for something that I'm enjoying, and selfishly or unselfishly, I guess I want everybody else to enjoy it too. So gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Thanks so much. Hopefully I'll speak to you again someday.
Absolutely. Thank you for your interest and your support, buddy. Thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care now.
Chris McAuley, just a rich history in writing, in TV, and Dacre Stoker. Well, you know who he is, and you know what he brings to it. What lovely guys, and hopefully I'll get them on again, have more conversations with them about the next step in the Stokerverse. I kept wanting to say the Dacreverse for some reason, because I was getting Dacre and Stoker. They have a similar sound. But yeah, it was absolutely fantastic talking to them, and I really do enjoy these comics, even though, you know, I could just be quite starstruck by certain people. That's not how I work. I'll only have people on the channel if I enjoy and either buy, support, or, you know, love their work. And in this case, yeah, I would definitely recommend The Virgin's Embrace. I think that don't know if it's a bit shiny with my light, but I really enjoyed that one, and I'm about halfway through Dracula. And if they make that into a movie, that's going to be an amazing movie. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. It'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel, because it'll just make me just keep wanting to do more of these and getting hold of people and interviewing them, supporting them. And if you want to be on and talk to me about one of your projects, just write in the comments or something like that. All right, guys, you take care. Hope you enjoyed that. Bye-bye.